Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind carried dust across the yard as if trying to cover what had been done. Blood soaked into the dry earth by the porch steps, and Willow Jane lay crumpled near the chicken coop, her cheek purpled and split, the buttons torn from her dress. Her husband's boot tracks led away toward the barn, then disappeared into the open prairie. He had gone. Again. But this time he was not coming back. The sky above was wide and empty, but the sound of hooves came steady and sure from the trail. A lone rider crested the ridge, his silhouette tall in the saddle and backlit by the setting sun. He pulled up his horse when he saw her. "God Almighty," he muttered, swinging down from the saddle. Willow tried to speak, but her mouth felt thick. Her lip had split and her eye was swollen near shut. She tasted copper. He crouched beside her. "Do not move, I have you." She blinked, tried to focus. His voice was deep and quiet like a promise. She knew that voice. "Quinn," she rasped. He looked at her, then really looked, and his chest rose hard like he had taken a bullet to the heart. Willow Jane, she remembered him now. Quinn Boone. He had been 3 years older, the boy who used to carry water to her father's fields, back when her world was not broken. He had been gone for years. Gone looking for cattle work down in Texas. She had not seen him since before the wedding. He looked at her like he had just seen a ghost, and then, without hesitating, he lifted her into his arms. "No one hurts you again," he said, voice shaking with something deeper than anger. Willow could not hold herself upright, so she let her head fall against his shoulder. His shirt smelled of leather and sweat and dust, but it was warm and it was safe. He carried her into the small cabin, past the door that hung crooked. Inside, the place was dark and cold, the stove dead, the floor scattered with broken dishes. 2 small beds sat in the corner, one with a patchwork quilt, the other with a doll tucked beneath the pillow. "Where are the children?" Quinn asked, panic in his voice. Willow forced her lips to move. "Schoolhouse, they stay there weekdays. Miss Palmer lets them sleep in the back room." Quinn's shoulders sagged with relief. "Praise God." He laid her gently on the bed and covered her with a blanket. "You are safe now," he said. She stared up at him, her good eye wet with tears. "He said he would kill me if I ever left." Quinn's jaw clenched. He pulled off his gloves and set them on the table. "He will not touch you again." "I swear it." He lit the stove, boiled water, and cleaned her wounds with hands that trembled. Willow tried not to cry, but the pain was bone deep. Quinn said nothing, just bandaged her with clean rags from the cupboard and sat beside her until the fire took the chill off the room. "Why are you here?" she asked after a long silence. "Long trail drive up from Texas," he said. "I heard your folks' place was still standing, thought I would stop by, see if your daddy needed help." She looked away. "They passed, Ma in the fever 2 winters back. Pa not long after." "I did not know," he said softly. "No one did. After Pa went, I married Levy. He was different after the war, mean mostly." Quinn's eyes darkened. "I saw what he did." She swallowed hard. "He would not let me leave, took the horse, took everything. Said I belonged to him." Quinn pushed to his feet. "That is not how marriage works. Maybe not for good men." He turned to her. "He left you in the yard like a dog. That is not a man, that is a coward." Her voice cracked. "I did not know who to ask for help. You do now." She stared at him. "Why would you help me?" He leaned back against the wall. "Because I remember the girl who gave me her last biscuit when I was hungry. Because I remember your laugh when we used to race to the creek. Because I never forgot you, Willow Jane." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. "You should go." "If Levy comes back." "I am not leaving." She shook her head. "You could get killed." He stepped forward, knelt beside the bed. "Let him try. I fought Comancheros in the Rio Grande. I have seen what men can do, but I will not run from this." Tears ran down her temple into her hair. "I am nothing now. You are everything," he said, his voice low and sure. "And you still have your children. I will ride to the schoolhouse in the morning and bring them home." She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "Please. Do not go yet." "I am not going anywhere, Willow." That night he sat by the fire, a rifle nearby, his hat on the table. Willow drifted in and out of sleep, the pain dulling under warmth and safety. And when she woke in the night, she saw him still there, watching over her like a sentry, the same boy who had once carried water to her field, now keeping her alive with nothing more than his hands and his heart. By morning, the bruises were darker, but the fear was softer. Willow sat up slowly, her ribs aching, and found that Quinn had already started breakfast. He turned when he saw her. "You are up." "I am." He looked her over. "How do you feel?" "Like I am still here." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Good. That is all that matters." She watched him crack eggs into a pan, the way his shoulders moved under his shirt, the quiet strength in him. It was not the same as Levy's fury. It was steadier, truer. "Quinn," she said. He faced her. "Thank you." He crossed the room and took her hand gently. "You never need to thank me for doing what is right." She held his fingers. "I am scared." He bent, pressed his forehead to hers. "Then I will be brave for both of us." And in that moment, something in her heart cracked open, not from pain, but from the start of something real. Something that felt like love. By noon, the sky had turned overcast, clouds heavy with the kind of cold that slipped down your collar and stayed there. Willow sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of tea, steam curling up to her face. The ache in her side was sharper now that the shock had worn off, but she didn't mention it. Quinn had saddled up early and ridden out toward the schoolhouse, promising he'd bring the children home before dark. She watched the snow start to fall, slow and dry like sifted flour. It gathered along the porch rail, softened the broken boards beside the steps. The blood had faded from the dirt, but the memory had not. She hadn't gone outside, not yet. The door creaked open just past noon, and she turned quick, heart kicking up. But it was only the neighbor girl, Hannah, no more than 16, with a scarf tied tight over her dark braid and a basket in her hands. "Mama sent bread," Hannah said. "She said she heard hollerin' last night." Willow nodded once, slow. "Tell her I'm grateful." Hannah hesitated in the doorway. "You want me to stay while he's gone?" Willow looked down at the worn tabletop. "I think I need to start doing this part myself." Hannah gave a small nod, left the basket, and disappeared into the snow. Willow stood slow, careful of her ribs, and crossed to the wide basin near the stove. She poured warm water from the kettle and washed her face. The bruising was darker today, and her lips still felt thick, but she could see her own eyes again. Not just the damage. The wind picked up around mid-afternoon. By the time hoofbeats crunched over the hard, packed snow, the sky had turned a pale gray and the light was starting to tilt. Quinn led the children inside, one in each hand. Josie ate, with her hair in 2 braids and a solemn look in her eyes. Thomas, 6, his cheeks red from the cold and his coat too thin for the weather. "Mama," Josie whispered, setting her book satchel down. "Are you all right?" Willow dropped to one knee and pulled both of them close. "I'm here." Thomas leaned into her, clutching her sleeve. "Miss Palmer said you were hurt." She kissed his temple. "I was, but I'm getting better." Quinn stood back, snow melting from his hat, his eyes on them but saying nothing. Willow looked up at him. "Thank you." He shrugged out of his coat, hung it near the stove. They were packed and waiting. "Josie had her boots on before I finished hitching the horses." Josie looked up. "He's not coming back, is he?" Willow hesitated, then shook her head. "He won't find us here." Thomas looked at Quinn. "Are you staying?" Quinn crouched beside them. "I'll be close by. And I'll make sure your mama's safe." Willow stood, steadying herself on the chair. "You'll stay for supper, if you'll have me." She looked toward the basket on the counter. "We'll manage." That night, the 4 of them sat close by the hearth. Josie read aloud from her primer while Thomas leaned against her shoulder. Quinn carved a small horse from spare pine wood, handing it to Thomas without a word when he finished. Willow watched him, the way he sat easy with the children, never pushing, just present. Later, after the children had gone to their beds and the fire had burned low, Willow stepped out onto the porch. The air was sharp, stars spread wide across the sky like scattered salt. Quinn stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes on the dark horizon. "He had friends in town," Willow said. "I know. They'll ask questions. I'll answer them." She turned to face him. "Why does this feel like the first time I can breathe?" "Because you're not alone now." She looked down at her hands, still marked by bruises. "I'm not sure I remember how to be anything but afraid." "You don't need to remember," he said. "You just need to keep going." She stepped closer, drawn by something steady in him. "Why now?" He met her gaze. "Because I should have come back sooner. And I won't make that mistake again." Silence fell between them, thick with everything unsaid. Then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold against his warmth. "You don't have to carry this," she said. "I'm not." His voice was quiet. "I'm carrying you." They stood like that until the cold began to bite, then went inside together. The fire had dimmed, but the warmth remained. By the end of the week, the snow had deepened, burying the old fence posts along the grazing field and turning the narrow trail into town near impassable. Quinn had repaired the front steps with wood salvaged from the barn wall, and Josie had begun sweeping the hearth each morning without being asked. Thomas followed Quinn like a shadow, quiet but watchful, always close, when tools were being handled or kindling split. Willow moved slower than before, but she had begun to stand straighter. Her face still bore the marks of what had passed, but her gaze no longer flinched from the mirror. She had not spoken of Levy again, and Quinn hadn't pressed. Some things needed to settle deeper before they could be unearthed. One morning, with the sun melting last night's frost off the roof, Willow stepped outside with her shawl tight around her shoulders and found Quinn saddling his gelding. Heading out, he tightened the cinch with practiced hands. A neighbor 3 miles west needs help moving timber. He lost his team to the cold last week. She came down the new porch steps, boots crunching in the snow. "Will you be back before dark?" He turned, lifting the reins. "Unless the trail turns to ice, I'll be home before supper." She hesitated. "You called it home." His hand paused on the saddle horn. "I did." She stepped nearer, her voice low. "And is it?" He studied her then, like he was measuring something long kept close. "If you'd have me here, Willow, I reckon it is." Her breath caught, but she held his gaze. "Then ride careful." He nodded once, mounted, and rode into the white hush of the morning. Willow stood there a long moment after he'd gone, the cold forgotten. Later that afternoon, while Josie practiced her stitching and Thomas napped by the fire, Willow searched through the attic crawlspace above the bedroom. She had not gone up there in over a year. Dust hung in the air, stirred by her steps, and the wood groaned under her weight. She found the cedar chest near the far wall. Her mother's quilt lay folded inside, the fabric faded, but her hands moved over it like it still breathed warmth. Beneath it, she found her father's Bible, pages thin and worn, and a bundle of letters tied with twine. She carried them down in silence. Josie looked up. "What's that?" "Something I forgot I needed," Willow said, placing the quilt on the bed. She waited until the children were asleep that night to open the letters. Most were from her sister in Missouri, long unanswered. One, though, bore no return name. She recognized the handwriting as Quinn's years old, the ink smudged in places. It had been tucked between others, untouched. She opened it slowly. "Willow, I hope this finds you. I heard word in Cheyenne that you married. I pray he is good to you. I won't come back if he is. But if he's not, if you ever need someone to stand with you, I will ride. No questions, just say the word." Q. She stared at the page until the words blurred. He had known. Somehow he had known even then. The next day, Quinn returned with a splinter in his hand and a patch of dried blood on his collar. Willow sat him at the table, pulled the splinter free with a pin heated over the stove, and wrapped the wound in a strip of clean linen. "You didn't say you wrote me," she said as she tied the cloth. "I didn't think it mattered anymore," he replied. "It does." He looked at her then, his hand still in hers. "I waited. I kept hoping I was wrong. You weren't." He let out a breath. "I should have come sooner." She finished the knot and met his eyes. "You're here now." The silence between them was easy, rested in something earned. She didn't let go of his hand. He cleared his throat. "What are your plans come spring?" She sat back, her voice steady. "I want to plant again, just the east field this year, maybe half corn, half beans. And I want the children in school full weeks. I can help with the field. I'd like that." He stood but didn't step away. "I also want to build a second room, give Thomas and Josie space of their own." Her brows lifted. "That's a lot of work." "I'm not going anywhere." She looked down, then back up at him. "I don't want you to." He reached for her cheek, his touch careful. "Then I'll stay." Outside, the snow had begun to melt in patches, revealing dark earth beneath. The wind was softer that day, and the house held the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. Inside, something had shifted, not fast, not loud but sure as the thaw underfoot. The last of the snow pulled back from the edges of the barn by mid-March, leaving the ground soft and slick beneath the thaw. Willow stood in the doorway with her sleeves rolled past her elbows, a handful of damp soil in one palm. She rubbed her thumb across the grit dark, rich, ready. The land had waited, quiet through the long cold, like her, and now it was time to begin again. Quinn had taken the wagon into town that morning, hauling a stack of fence rails and a short list of seed packets she'd written out in her careful script. He hadn't needed to ask why she chose those crops. She'd told him the soil would take to beans and corn best, and he'd simply nodded, already hitching the team. The children were in the barn loft, sorting through the last of the empty feed sacks. Josie had taken to mending them with leftover thread, her stitches uneven but sturdy. Thomas was quieter since the thaw began, prone to watching the wind move through the bare cottonwoods with a look too thoughtful for his years. Willow stepped down into the yard, the hem of her skirt brushing against the damp earth. The bruises on her face had turned yellow at the edges and were fading fast. Her ribs still ached some mornings, but she no longer winced when she stretched. She walked the length of the old garden plot, measuring it in strides. Her boots sank just a little, leaving prints behind her that the wind didn't erase. She was turning back when she saw Quinn's wagon rounding the bend near the creek. The horses moved slow, their breath visible in the cool air, and Quinn held the reins in one hand, the other resting over his thigh. He spotted her and tipped his hat with a flick of his fingers, then pulled the wagon near the barn. "Got everything on your list," he said as he climbed down. Had to ask the storekeep about the pole beans, but he found a sack buried behind the barley. Willow took the seeds from him, cradling them like something fragile. "You remembered the twine for the rows in the back next to the posts." She smiled and turned toward the house. "I'll put these in the pantry. Supper's near ready if you want to wash up." He followed her to the steps. "How's the ground looking?" "Ready," she said over her shoulder. "So am I." That evening, after the children had gone to bed and the candles burned low in the windows, Willow laid the seed packets out across the table. She moved them into rows: corn, beans, squash, a handful of wildflowers Josie had begged for. Quinn sat across from her, nursing a thick mug of coffee, his sleeves still damp from the pump. "You ever planted before?" she asked. "Dug fence trenches mostly. Helped with hay once down near San Angelo, but never anything from seed." She traced the edge of the corn packet with one finger. "It's a quiet kind of work, but it gives back." Quinn leaned forward, arms resting on the table. "You think it'll be enough to carry through winter if we get the rows in before the spring storms and the frost stays gone?" "I do." He nodded, then looked at her, serious. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Willow sat back, surprised by the question. "When they were little, I did. Thought about starting over someplace no one knew me, but the land's in my bones. My ma's hands planted those trees by the creek." He was quiet a long moment, then, "I meant now. If you ever wanted to start fresh somewhere else." She tilted her head. "Why would I, when I finally feel safe in my own home?" His gaze held hers. "Just want you to know you've got the choice." She stood, folded the empty seed packets and slid them into the pocket of her apron. "I made it, Quinn. I chose to stay, not because I have to, but because it's where I want you." He stood too, slow. "I wasn't sure if I'd earned that yet." "You have," she said, her voice soft. "One day at a time." They stood close, the room dim around them. The fire had burned down to coals, casting a low glow across the floorboards. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. "You gave me back my breath." He didn't speak, just brought his hand to her waist, grounding her there, steady and warm. That night, he didn't leave when the candles went out. He stayed, not out of pity or duty, but because it had become his place too, built not out of rescue, but of something steadier, something slow and lasting, like roots finding hold beneath thawed earth. The first green shoots pressed through the soil by early May, curling upward with the fragile determination of things that had survived the cold and dared to grow. Willow knelt at the edge of the rows with her skirts pinned up and her hands buried in earth that had once only reminded her of loss. Now it held promise. She pressed another seed into the warm dirt and moved to the next space, her fingers moving with quiet purpose. Behind her, the sound of sawing came steady from the side of the house. Quinn was building the new room his idea, but hers in every way that mattered. He had measured the walls with Josie at his elbow, marked the boards while Thomas handed him nails, and cut each plank with a precision that came from more than skill. It came from knowing this was where he meant to stay. Willow stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "You want water?" Quinn looked up from the sawbuck, sweat dampening his collar. "If you're offering." She brought the tin cup from the basin and handed it to him. He drank deep, then passed it back without a word. She watched him a moment, then glanced toward the new frame. "You ever build a room before?" He set the saw down and leaned against the porch rail. "Helped raise a bunkhouse in Kansas once, but this is different." "How so?" "I never built something that was mine." A long breeze stirred the trees near the creek, and Willow looked out at the field. "Feels strange, doesn't it, after all the years gone wrong?" He followed her gaze. "It does, but good strange." She turned to face him. "You think we'll be all right?" "I know we will." Inside, Josie was humming as she trimmed cloth for a new dress, one she was making herself with patience no one had expected from her. Thomas sat on the floor nearby, his carved wooden horse tucked under one arm, watching the knife Quinn had given him glide across a piece of soft pine. He was learning rhythm balance, how to shape something from nothing. That evening, Willow brought her mother's old tablecloth from the chest and laid it over the kitchen table. The pattern was faded, violets stitched in uneven rows, but it meant something. She baked cornbread and stewed beans with garlic and onion, and when she called them in to eat, Quinn paused in the doorway, hat in hand. "You set the table like it's a Sunday." "It feels like one," she said. They ate together with the windows open to the evening air. After the dishes were cleared and the children washed and tucked into bed, Willow stepped onto the porch. Quinn followed, their silence companionable. "I've been thinking," she said after a while. "Dangerous habit," he said without smiling. "I want to marry again." He turned to her, slow. "You sure?" "I didn't say to anyone, I said to you." He reached for her hand. "I'd be honored." She linked her fingers with his. "I won't wear white and I won't stand in a church." "You don't have to. I want the vows to be spoken plain. No show. Just truth." "That's how I want them too." She stepped closer, her free hand resting against his chest. "Then we'll do it here. Under the cottonwoods," she nodded. "With the children beside us." He kissed her then, gentle but certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. The wedding was held 2 weeks later beneath the trees, just after the beans began to flower. Hannah's mother brought a cake sweetened with honey, and Miss Palmer stood with Josie, her hand on the girl's shoulder. Thomas wore a clean shirt and held the rings in a carved box Quinn had made himself. The vows were spoken without tremble or doubt. Willow's voice was low but steady when she said, "I choose you for what we've come through and what we'll build." Quinn's eyes never left hers. "I'll carry our life with both hands and never let it drop." That night, as the light faded pink across the land, they danced slow in the yard. No music but the frogs by the creek and the hush of wind through the trees. Willow rested her cheek against Quinn's shoulder, and he held her like she was the only thing that mattered. Years passed quiet and full. The crops fed them through each winter. Josie took to teaching, first Thomas, then others, and helped Miss Palmer in the schoolhouse until she had one of her own. Thomas grew tall and sure, carving not just toys but tools, furniture, things that lasted. He kept Quinn's old knife in his pocket for years. Willow hung dried herbs by the stove each October, and in spring she set new rows with her hands still strong from work. She never grew tired of watching Quinn come in from the fields, mud on his boots and a soft look in his eyes that never wavered. They built a life slow and sure, out of wood and earth and trust, and it held. Each night before the fire burned low, Quinn would rest his hand over hers and say, "Still glad you asked me to stay," and Willow always would smile soft and true. Always.